Hey guys, I'm David DiMuzio.
And I'm Steve Cook.
This video is why strip surgery is disappearing. This is the FUE, FUT surgery debate, and I recently got a couple comments on the channel with people talking about a very famous strip surgery doctor, one of the most well-known in the world, who is no longer doing FUT strip surgery. He's only performing FUE surgery. So I went and I watched this because I was really curious as to why that happened. And it was really interesting in this video, goodness gracious. So I've had FUT and FUE surgery. I have 3 FUT surgeries, 2 FUE surgeries. Steve has had a few FUT surgeries and FUE surgeries as well. So we both experienced both kinds of surgeries. So we're not really that biased because we've tried both, you know? And we want you just to have as much hair as possible. And what kind of blew me away on this video, and it kind of made me sad to be honest, the doctor says, okay, we've stopped doing FUT surgery. Our results are better with FUE surgery, but then he kind of like backtracks a little bit and says no one wants FUT surgery anymore. And then at the very end of the video, he actually mentions if we hadn't transitioned to doing FUE surgery, we would have been left behind and no one would have basically come to us for surgeries. So when you kind of read between the lines, and we're going to demonstrate like scientifically in a pretty visual way in a second why there's some really great benefits to FUT surgery, but when you read between the lines, no wonder he says that their results are better with FUE surgery because now they don't do FUT surgery anymore. And again, why do they not do FUT surgery? It's not because it's not good. It's really because nobody wants it, because it's not the sexy surgery that people want. And he very clearly says that in the video. Nobody wanted to do FUT surgery, so we started doing FUE surgery because we would have been left behind. Okay, so I'm gonna have Steve kind of turn around and I'm gonna demonstrate. To me, this is so obvious as to why that there's a benefit of FUT surgery and why I think a lot of guys should get both done actually and will need to have both done. So with FUE surgery, you're gonna be taking little hair follicles all over this area, right? Like all over this area right there. The best hair on most guys is in what's called the center core. That's the best hair, donor hair that you have. And the center core is in this area right here. The reason actually Steve doesn't really have a best center core area is because he's just had tons of grafts taken out of the back of his head, but pretty homogeneously. So now there is almost no center core. Okay, you probably had your center core removed enough times, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the center core is like this area right here, okay? Or on me, like that area. That's where the most DHT resistant hair is from. If I was gonna do FUE surgery, if I took out all of the hair in the center core, all of that, what would you be left with? You'd be left with a big bald spot that would look way worse than a strip. You'd be left with all of the hair gone out of the center core. So if you took it with just FUE, all the center core hair is now gone, okay? But now I can transplant that on the top of the head. The problem is now you have a huge bald spot and a huge line on the back of your head. So you can't do that. So in FUE, you have to take the hair outside of the center core as well. You have to go kind of everywhere around here and take hair. Okay, but that's not all the best hair. All the best hair is in the center core. So with FUT surgery, you can take out just the hair from the center core, the best donor hair that you have, and then you can sew it back together. And now, yes, you do have a small scar, but that's gonna be covered up. And now you've gotten all of the best center core hair taken out, and you basically had a sort of invisible surgery because it's now tied back together, and now everything else is just left completely intact, but you've gotten like 100% of the best hair. And you could go do that again, get a second FUT surgery, and the same thing happens. You're just getting the very, very best hair, and yet it sort of becomes invisible, versus if you did that same kind of concept with FUE and you just poked tons of holes out of the center core, it would look horrible. It would just be completely like ruined. It would be a huge bald like ring that you would have on the back of your hair. Okay, so after you've done that a couple of times with FUT, what can you now do? Or you can do it also in reverse, the other way around, FUE and then FUT. But what can you now do? You've now taken 2 strips and now you could do FUE to get even more grafts. And now you can go a little outside of this center core. Now you can do it in the center core, whatever is left, you can like homogeneously take those grafts out of there. So you can really maximize the amount of donor hair that's needed. You can sit up now, Steve. You can maximize the amount of donor hair that's taken. And the thing is, most guys who are getting hair transplants, they don't have good hair. You know, they don't have great donor hair. They are like quite bald. They do need a lot of donor hair. And so doing both of those surgeries together really well is actually going to maximize that and give them the best chance and the best hope of a really great hair transplant result. Now, also in this same video with this famous surgeon, he very specifically says, if you're listening really closely, he's like, oh, patients with good donor hair, we can do this.
Basically how this is working is that this industry is sliding everything toward FUE, right? Machine companies sell machines. Machine companies sell very expensive machine parts. There is no scarring. That's a lie. There's tons of little dots, but you don't have the linear scar. So as David said, it's a very sexy sell.
By the way, he mentions this in the video. He's like, oh, a guy with great donor hair and very little loss. We can basically pack his hair as much as possible and just make his hair look incredible. Well, yeah, because he's a guy with great donor hair and not a lot of hair loss. So you don't need to do FUT on a guy like that. You can do FUE and it's gonna be fantastic. Most hair transplant patients, at least the guys that I see come into your office, they're like super bald guys with not great donor hair. So that's not their situation at all.
Yeah, it's cherry picking. Cherry picking has been constant in this industry. Back in the old days where look at the before, look at the after. Oh, by the way, that guy's had 5 surgeries, right?
Yeah.
It's a cherry picking. You know, you have to be very clear. So FUE is a great procedure. Clinics that I associate myself with are about 50-50. But if it were so phenomenally great, why would anybody do an FUT procedure? And for all the reasons we can go on and on and on. Poor donor hair, too much hair loss. But in this video, this doctor's talking about how he was one of the top surgeons in the world doing FUT for years and years and years and years and years. People flying in from all over the world. And all of a sudden, boom, he's now an FUE only clinic.
Yeah.
And what I always say to that, I say, well, doc, you're kind of kicking away all the Norwood 5s, the Norwood 6s, the Norwood 7s, the donor hair that's really poor in the back of the head that is just too thin and fine to survive an FUE procedure. And that's not mentioned in that video. So we're talking about the best case scenarios. And in a best case scenario, yeah, FUE is a sexier sell. It's easy, it sells itself. I am never criticizing any clinics. I am never criticizing any doctors, but come on, man.
Yeah, the next other comment that we see a lot is they'll mention certain other surgeons and they're like, well, look at this guy, look at this result that he got. And yes, it's true. Like this one doctor got this incredible result, this Norwood 7 and FUE only, and look what he was able to do. But you generally, a lot of factors when you start really looking into that, and usually it's like they have dark skin, there's not as much of contrast to make the hair not look as good. They have incredible donor hair. Usually they're like Hispanic guys or Middle Eastern guys with this awesome amount of donor hair. I mean, there could be the size of their head. And sure, if you only show the very best results, which you're going to, then it's going to look amazing, but that's just not the case for everyone. And I hope that when I showed you just with Steve's head, that this makes sense visually. Like to me, it doesn't make sense otherwise visually. Like if you're going to maximize the donor hair, for most guys, it's going to make sense to do both kinds of surgery over the course of their life.
Yeah. And while you were showing them, and you explained it very well, David, in my head, I just have, that Western European hair. So it's a weaker, it's not as strong as David's. I'm very happy the way it turned out for me, but I had a lot of strip procedures. On these areas where you were pointing out where we would take FUE grafts, if you do that from the start, this guy's gonna end up having a very poor, fine, thin result. And then what do you say to that guy? Well, you chose FUE, you read the disclaimer disclosures. Hey doc, you think maybe an FUT procedure first, or maybe 2 or 2.5 could have given me a better result? Well, you wanted FUE, you didn't want FUT. This is about education. This is about saying what we need to say for you guys to understand. I mean, I know you can think for yourselves.
It's also, if you're taking hair outside of the safe zone, of course, we do have medications. Hopefully the patients stay on those medications, but that is not the most DHT resistant hair. Like the hair that's down here and up here is just not the most DHT resistant hair, so it's not the most ideal hair that you would put on the top of your head.
Yeah, the most important kind of takeaway that I saw from that video was when the doctor clearly said that nobody wants FUT anymore.
Yeah.
And then magically, FUE becomes so much better in the quality of the grafts versus the dissection of the grafts under microscopes. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
I was actually surprised that he said that, because I feel like it gave away the whole premise of really, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
why he said that anyway. It's kind of like selling a house and you're like, yeah, this neighborhood is way better. Oh, by the way, nobody wants to live in the other neighborhood anymore or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
If you mention that one thing, well, obviously you're going to think that it's better because like nobody likes the other things things, so we're going to transition this into being better.
The reality of that is that FUE is a lot more sexier to sell. And it's not just that. It's less overhead for the clinic. They don't have to worry about that process of explaining the scar and how short you can wear your hair. And not for nothing, but anybody that sees all these videos.
A lot of times they all have also the techs that are doing the extractions now.
Yeah.
So that saves the doctor from actually doing no techs are doing an FUT strip extraction.
If you go to one of these clinics and you see a strip come out, Dr. McGrath, who did both of our hairlines, if he takes out a strip of maybe 3,000 grafts and passes it to the technicians to both sliver it and then dissect it under microscopes, that is very time consuming, very labor intensive, and very hard to do it right. It is so hard to train these technicians. It is expensive to purchase these microscopes, to patients there longer. There's all these things that seem negative, but oh, by the way, the hair's the best on your head, and you can get more of it. But we'll look past that because FUE, lay them flat, pop out the grafts, and put them in. It's a lot less overhead. It's less time consuming, and everything's about time. And it's just easier to do. So
you can have techs do way more of the work, the extraction work.
Yeah, the problem that, again, I keep saying the same thing over and over, the problem I have is what about that guy that is not a candidate for FUE, at least from a fundamental standpoint, from a medical standpoint? We're just gonna do FUE on him? I hope that they're turning that guy away.